What's the full battery life experience for the Xiaomi 17 Pro from 100% to 1%? This video will provide a detailed one-to-one rendition of the battery life experience. The usage process is 30% Wi-Fi and 70% data. This is my first day using the new phone. First, the phone's temperature was relatively high after the initial upgrade, which is normal. Yesterday, the 17 Pro's temperature remained relatively high throughout the day. I'm not sure if it's because the system and software were still being compiled after the upgrade, which may have caused the temperature to rise. Today, my experience wasn't as bad, so it's likely due to the upgrade. Let's begin our battery life experience. Today at 1:25 p.m., the battery was fully charged and the front end displayed 100%. I charged it for another half an hour, then started playing video apps. 20 minutes later, the battery was at 99%. Now let's move on to the next one at 2:44 p.m. An hour later, the battery was at 89%. This usage scenario is still over Wi-Fi, including some video apps, which is our typical daily use. At 3:40, the battery reached 80%, meaning the first 20% was all over Wi-Fi. Then at 4:33, the battery reached 72%. During that time, I played a 20-minute game using the backup screen and a phone case. At 6:46, the battery reached 43%, primarily due to video apps and editing software, which are relatively power intensive. During that time, I also had a 10-minute video call on WeChat and then uploaded a video after editing. The device's temperature reached around 41 degrees Celsius, similar to my previous experience with the 15S Pro. Then, while I was having dinner, I watched a 25-minute TV series, all at maximum quality with the brightness and volume at 50%. At 7:22, the battery reached 34%, and I continued using videos until 8:26 when it reached 21%. At this point, I was actually a bit worried about the phone's battery life, but since I was going out and needed navigation, I decided to test it. I used the navigation app for about 35 minutes and the battery level was down to 15%. After picking up the person, I used navigation for another 16 minutes and the battery level was down to 8%. At this point, the battery was actually draining very quickly, so I stopped using the navigation app. So the heavy usage had ended at this point, and the rest of the time I used it was just the occasional WeChat message. By 10 o'clock, the battery level was down to 5%, by 10:30 it was down to 2%, and finally at 10:38 it was down to 1%. By then, I had just arrived home. After using the navigation app for nearly an hour, I noticed something quite noticeable. The positioning seemed slightly more accurate than that of the Xiaomi 15S Pros. This equated to a total of 9 hours and 13 minutes of use. Since Xiaomi doesn't have a screen on timer, let's take a look at the screen on time. It shows 7 hours and 43 minutes. Then, excluding the minutes outside our testing range, I subtracted another 79 minutes for a total of 6 hours and 24 minutes of screen on time. So what do you think of this battery life? If you're particularly concerned about battery life, I'd recommend the standard version of the Xiaomi 17 or even the Pro Max. However, since the Pro series has a backup screen, I think its primary use case is using the rear camera for selfies, video recording, gaming, or displaying wallpapers which are relatively emotionally charged. That concludes this video on the Xiaomi 17 Pro's battery life test. Later, I'll be testing the Xiaomi 17 Pro and Xiaomi 15 side by side to see how the battery life compares, as well as the Xiaomi 17 Pro's outdoor experience. If you have any other questions about the Xiaomi 17 Pro, please feel free to share them.